From WKNOW, this is Steve Chanley with One Question Too Many. Today's guest will be Jay McAllister, the founder and CEO of Paragon Tech, a technology consulting company that specializes in advising law firms on emerging technologies and managing their information technology systems. Mr. McAllister has emerged as one of today's very prolific and important thought leaders on the transformative impact artificial intelligence is having and will have on the way law is practiced. Today's program is made possible by the law firm of Employer Advocates Group, serving California employers since 2002, with offices in Orange County and San Luis Obispo County, California. eaglawgroup.com. We're joined today by Jay McAllister, who's the CEO and founder of Paragon Tech. Now, you founded your company about 13 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about how you got started.
Well, it all started, I had a friend, Mike Brady, who's a real estate and estate planning attorney. And one day he called me in a panic because all of his entire company's QuickBooks records were gone. I'm sure you can imagine, as an attorney, you're frantically trying to figure out, how do you build clients? How do you know what the status of your matters are? Everything was in QuickBooks. So I come by his office. At this time, I was just sort of tech savvy, but I didn't have a company. And, as I went through troubleshooting steps, basically, I found out that his QuickBooks company file was actually stored on a flash drive that was plugged into his desktop computer, which coincidentally was sitting on the floor when his cleaning person came through, sweeping, mopping, and accidentally kicked the flash drive out of the computer. So therefore, his QuickBooks company file was no longer on the computer. It seemed like it was all missing. So we sorted that all out, and then I was asking him afterwards, like, is there, there's got to be a better way to store this information. Let's go to QuickBooks Cloud. And then I was asking, how do you keep track of your time? How do you keep track of, the narratives for your time entries and your documents? And really, he didn't have any good answers for it. So I reached out to a couple friends of mine. Now, at the time, I knew a bunch of attorneys. I was, I guess 18 years old. From the time I started driving from 16 to 18, I had gotten so many speeding tickets. So I knew a lot of attorneys. Really thankful for my parents for, funding that speed demon phase, which that's an entirely separate story. So I reached out to some of those attorneys and to try to find help for my friend Mike. And none of them have good answers. They all were sort of operating in a similar function, and I realized that there was a large need there. So I really decided to start my company, Paragon Tech, focusing on helping attorneys get the most out of their technology.
My assumption had been that you had started a business that was more general application and that somehow you got exposed to the legal services industry and found it compelling. But it sounds as if that was part of your business plan right from the beginning.
Well, it certainly wasn't from the very beginning. Like I mentioned, I was tech savvy before, so I was sort of figuring out what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to start a company. And, since a very young age, I was always very tech savvy. I grew up, in 94, as I was born. So I grew up, sort of at the boon of technology when it started really being integrated into our lives. Although I will say, I still remember we did have dial-up. So I remember all the funny noises, it would make every time you wanted to log on to the internet. I knew being tech savvy, I wanted to do something technology related. And initially I was sort of performing basic troubleshooting and computer repair, those type of things for some businesses in the community. But when I found this issue that seemed to be fairly ubiquitous with lawyers, I just jumped at the opportunity. And, now 13 years later, it was the best decision I could have ever made.
What percentage of your client base is currently made up of law firms?
I'd say probably maybe 95%. It's funny. I still have my very first client is actually an ice cream parlor named the Plush Horse in Palos Park, Illinois, and so they're the OGs. They've still been we've been rocking with them for 13 years. But yeah,
Nice.
Not primarily my clients are law firms and attorneys. I'm in-house counsel as well.
Is there anything about the culture or business model of law firms that kind of sucked you in?
Absolutely. So as someone I've always been fairly skeptical about most things and ideas that I would encounter. As a matter of fact, a lot of my friends would just say that I'm a contrarian. They thought I like to go against the grain just for the sole purpose of going against the grain. But it takes a lot of convincing for me to adopt a belief or an idea. So I found that actually really, it's sort of integrated into the field of law and working with attorneys very well. Because as you know, typically there's this propensity to be a skeptic, before attorneys even enter law school. And then law school it doubles and triples down on that. And it teaches you to issue spot, which is really just the practice of becoming a professional skeptic. So I found that I was someone who demanded real results from technology. So I wanted to sort of, circumvent all the marketing buzzwords that are out there and get to solutions that actually create a measurable effect in law firms. And I think my clients they appreciate that and respect that. And it just makes it a really easy relationship.
Will you describe the business or services that you do provide to law firms in particular?
So I think at the basis, it all comes down to my core belief is that you really need a well-designed case management system, right? So like I mentioned before, so many firms, they operate out of their Excel or out of their Microsoft Outlook inbox. They'll have folders that they set up. They create their own sort of taxonomy with folder structures for clients and matter numbers, and it's not very consistent. So as a solo, maybe you can get away with that for a little while. You start adding on attorneys and paralegals and support staff, and now this becomes a very unscalable business model because there's no consistency or uniformity across the board. Everyone's storing files in their own manner, documents, email attachments, time being captured. It's all done in this siloed fashion where everyone sort of has their own way of doing it. So I believe that for every law firm, in order to really enter into an era of scalability, you must have as a base prerequisite a well-designed case management system. So we typically start there, figuring out what the firm's requirements are, which is, there are various factors, from, the practice areas, the firm size, whether the attorneys are working remotely or whether they're working in one unified office, what other software the firm is using. There's all these factors. And then ultimately we would make recommendations as to what the best case management system would be for that firm. There's about 160, last time I checked, case management systems. And we help them to identify the best one based on their needs. We'll implement that platform for them. And then we provide ongoing technical support and training. That's a big part of it. If you could have the best software out there, but if you don't have the buy-in because individuals at the firm are not using the platform properly, they never fully adopted it, then you have what's called a failed technology initiative, which no one wants.
Are there different law practice management solutions that you like better than others?
There certainly are some that are better than others, but what I would say honestly is that the software landscape has become the playing field has sort of been leveled, and software is generally good. It just there's not necessarily, it's not a factor of which one's better than the other. It's which one meets the requirements of the firm better than the other platforms, right? Like you have some platforms that are designed to support a specific practice area, right? Like a file vine, heavy in the personal injury, plaintiff's personal injury space. You have other firms who are more so focused on corporate M&A transactions. You have platforms that are based on supporting larger staff counts, smaller staff counts, or solo. So there's all these factors that need to be considered. And one of the worst things that you can see happen is when a firm unintentionally chooses the wrong platform. Because let's face it, the highest value of a lawyer is to provide counsel to their clients, not to select case management systems or technology. So when they get it wrong and then they're in the wrong ecosystem, typically it's only known once the implementation is completed. Now that firm has to figure out how they want to approach the problem. Do they deal with it and make do, or do they reevaluate and choose a different platform? Of course, that means that all of the time you spent on implementation and training is now sort of a moot point.
Now, if you had a client who was starting a law firm as a startup from scratch, what advice would you give them about the various law practice management and other solutions that are available?
So the first thing I'd say, and this is something that's difficult. It's a problem that I've recognized quite a while ago, which is the fact that it's not an easy decision to figure out what platform would be most suitable for your firm. Because if you think about it, the entirety of your operations is going to be funneled through this platform. So you really need to make sure that you wind up in the proper platform. Now, we're actually working, and as of this is March in 2025. So we're actually working on putting together a universal compatibility standard, which will make it easier for firms, for smaller firms and solos primarily. Will be designed to cater to make it easier for them to select the right platform based on features, functionality, and requirements of the firm, as well as compatibility with other software that they may want to use, right? Things like e-signature platforms or document management tools or AI platforms to help with legal research or document contract drafting and review and analysis. So there's all these factors that need to be taken into account. So my main, as for now, before our tool is actually built, the main piece of advice that I would provide is that do not attempt to do this on your own. Reach out to software vendors, ask them very specific targeted questions, have a consultant that you can work with who's an unbiased, independent third party who can cut through some of the marketing tactics that many of these companies use, right? They're incentivized to make a sale. So a lot of times when we conduct demos with our clients to evaluate a particular case management system, a client will ask a question about, for example, we have a client who has 8 or 9 separate compensation types for their attorneys, right? So they have supervision fees if they're supervising the work. They have origination fees if they brought the work into the firm. They have responsible attorney fees if they're the primary attorney working on that case, right? So there's all these compensation types, and they asked a question on a demo about, does the platform allow us to track the various compensation types that we have? And the answer that they received back was yes, the platform does allow you to track it. But since we were on the demo and we knew how the platform operated, we were able to say, okay, let's look a little bit deeper. Are you able to generate a report automatically that would tally up those respective hours and associate those with the proper individual within the firm so that you can make those payments, those distributions quickly? Well, it turns out, no, it has the ability to track it. You just can't do it automatically within that platform. So it's like, these are those small nuances that don't seem like a major decision factor, but once you're in the platform, that's when they typically present themselves, right? Another example, there's a personal injury firm, There's a personal injury firm who migrated from one platform to another. And I'll just say the first platform was My Case. They moved into Clio, 2 very popular case management tools. Well, when they moved from the old platform into the new, they didn't realize that they needed to set up custom fields for the statute of limitation dates so that those would transfer over into Clio. They did not do that. So once they fully migrated into the platform, they had to spend literally months going through manually and referencing the old platform, My Case, to figure out what the statute of limitations deadline was, and then moving that over into the new platform. Because the way it all pulled in is everything was set as the statute of limitations has been satisfied. So that obviously created a large issue for the firm.
Have you ever had to advise a law firm to just scrap everything that it had in place because it was so inferior to what was currently available?
Yeah, so those situations are always really difficult. I have firsthand experience with this. One of my very first mid-market clients, this was exactly the case. Chicago-based firm, about an 90 person firm total. And the reason that they came to me was that they had gone through this process on their own of implementing a new case management system. And what they found when they were fully implemented, after a year of training and implementation and time and money spent, they found out that this platform did not support leads billing, right? So they needed to be able to enter specific codes that would correspond with their time entries so that they could submit those to the insurance carriers and have those invoices be paid. And the platform did not support lead billing. There was no workaround. So they already knew that the platform was not going to work for them. So that's why they were introduced to me, because they didn't want to make the mistake twice. Unfortunately, that firm did have to unwind everything that they had done over that last year and we have to move them into a new case management system.
That story reminds me of something that actually happened in San Luis Obispo County years ago involving a very famous hotel and restaurant that was sold a computer system that ended up not being as fully functional and useful and capable as what had been presented. The owner was livid and successfully sued them for it. So
I think in the legal context, in the legal tech context, there are certainly times where information just is not relayed properly between the firm or the attorney and the software vendor. But I've also seen scenarios where the software vendors have made clear misrepresentations of what the platform could do, I would assume, in order to secure the sale. Right. So this is not something that is, this is a problem that exists in the marketplace. And if you're not trained to be able to spot these issues, they can present themselves in the worst ways and at the worst time.
It would seem that there's probably a pretty high likelihood of there being a mismatch sometimes between what a law firm client expects and what they receive based on the information that they provide the vendor and what the vendor tells them in response. There's, a communicative asymmetry that can sometimes happen, which is just part of normal human interaction. But I could also see people intentionally misrepresenting the capabilities of software because they just want to make a sale. I would like to think that those are people who are in the minority, but some people, that's how they feel like they have to put food on their table, I guess. So
yeah, we haven't done an official study on this, but if we ever do, I'll release the numbers of what comes out of this report. The promise of AI is to bring these capabilities down to the average layperson. So Sam Altman, who is the CEO of OpenAI, he was recently interviewed, and it was specifically in the context of attorneys and whether the field of prompt engineering would become a more prominent occurrence. Right? Prompt engineering, of course, is the act of producing the right questions and removing bias so that you get the best output out of a large language model. So in the way Sam Altman responded to his question, he said if he's doing his job properly, prompt engineering is not a field that takes off. He doesn't want to see that take off. The whole promise of AI is to make this accessible so that you don't need to be a prompt engineer or a specialist. You just need to be a human who just asks plain questions and gets very relevant answers delivered back to you. Is able to understand the context and really get at what you're trying to understand and deliver that to you. So, yeah, I think that's it's interesting how rapid AI has developed and how the capabilities have improved so quickly, and the cost associated with those. You're seeing models like DeepSeek, which has, it's now March. DeepSeek was hit the market back in January, and it reduced the cost of AI substantially because they were able to produce and train this model for substantially less money than the U.S.-based large language models. And as a result, the capitalist markets typically favor efficiency, so it drove down the cost for all vendors. So OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, they all dropped the cost of their queries so that way they could compete in the marketplace. So it's good for everyone. And typically you're seeing each year that passes, the cost of AI decreases typically by 1/2 what it was the previous year.
Are there some law practice management programs that are more adaptive to AI than others?
Absolutely. You're seeing now that, early 2025, these certain case management systems are implementing AI features right into the platform. So a big one is Clio. They're sort of the behemoth in the marketplace. As a matter of fact, they just finished I think it was a Series G funding, and they were valued at $3 billion. I think it was a $900 million fundraising round. And a big part of their model is to integrate AI into their case management platform. So they have what's called Clio Duo. And the promise of Clio Duo is that it will allow you to interact directly with your documents. Right, so there's this, and we can talk about it more in depth, but there's this concept of retrieval augmented generation, otherwise known as RAG. And what RAG addresses the issue of hallucination within AI models. So we all know, unfortunately, the fate of Steve Schwartz out of New York, who, used an AI large language model when citing cases that turned out to be fictitious. Retrieval augmented generation addresses this problem by confining the AI model to a subset of documents, right? So rather than giving it access to the trillions of documents that, for example, ChatGPT was trained on, you're saying, hey, ignore that. I want you to look at these 100 documents. And out of these, that's what I want you to base your output on, and that only. And you can take it a step further even and have it linked to the primary source and say where exactly it found its whatever excerpt it's using to generate its output. So Clio Duo leverages this technology, this retrieval augmented generation, and allows you to interact with your documents. So you can ask queries like, for example, show me the best motion to compel that I've produced for my firm, right? And it can analyze between all the attorneys there, or you can say, hey, how many hours in general do I typically spend on an uncontested divorce? All right. So there's all these questions in this context, or hey, I need to prep for a meeting with client XYZ. Tell me what I need to know, right? And based on all of your time entries, your documents, any information that you have, emails, correspondence, phone calls, notes, it'll use all of this, again, just those documents and not the large language model at large. And it uses that to inform its output. So you are seeing this start to be integrated into case management systems. Now, an interesting thing to keep in mind is that there's sort of a couple layers of abstraction happening here that you need to be aware of. So whenever you're using an AI-based tool, there are sort of there's what they call the foundational models. These are models like GPT, which is the underlying model that fuels ChatGPT. ChatGPT being the chat-based interface that allows you to connect to GPT model. So that's OpenAI, right? You have Google, and they have Gemini is their large language model. You have Anthropic, they have Claude, right? So there's these foundational models. There's only a handful of those. There's DeepSeek as well, which is sort of the new one on the scene. Now, these models are essentially what powers every AI tool that you would use. They're all powered on these base technologies. So you can think of the foundational models as the engine that's used to, you can put whatever body you want. You take a Ford Taurus, right? And you have the 3-liter V6, and that can go in any model. That can go in the Ford Taurus and the Ford Escape and the Ford Explorer, right? So the program that you're using, the application, is what a model of that car would be. So these are tools like Spellbook. These are things like Microsoft Copilot. These are things like ChatGPT, not GPT, the underlying technology, but ChatGPT, the web interface for it, right? So the thing to remember is that whatever platform you're using, you need to just make sure you understand what model they use, because certain models are better at certain types of tasks. Claude typically tends to be really great at programming tasks, right? And then even within those particular foundational models, there are different versions. So you'll have something like ChatGPT. They have 4.0 model, which is great for general text output and narrative outputs. But then they have, they also have a model. So you have those foundational models. So even then, there's some nuances in the versions that are contained within. So for example, with ChatGPT, you have GPT 4.0, which tends to be good at basic text creation and narrative for a narrative purpose. But then you have their deep reasoning models like 0 through 01, which are typically good for tasks which require more thought, which require more complex schema to put together an appropriate response. Typically tend to be not as good at narrative writing, but much better at things like science and math. So understanding what foundational model your platform uses is pretty critical to figuring out what the best use case for that particular model will be.
Other than Clio, what other products are out there that have effectively integrated AI in the platform?
So many of them have. Many of them are releasing smaller features such as drafting a functionality that assists attorneys in, drafting documents directly in the platform. There's certainly none that have taken such a major leap forward, which is why I brought up Clio Duo. Many are taking a fairly conservative approach. There are companies like Centerbase who have purposefully not implemented AI tools into their platform. Right? They want to make sure that the base platform's functionalities are there before they dive into incorporating AI. So it really depends on what you look at. But right now, you're seeing a lot of general purpose drafting assistance tools and not necessarily major AI functionality built into the case management system. A lot of that functionality right now, and there is quite a bit in the legal profession that lies outside of the case management system. But that does raise a great point, which is the fact that if your firm is a firm that is very tech forward and you believe that AI will be a part of your firm's future, that's actually one of the qualifications for selecting your case management system, because some platforms have what's called an open API, and it allows you to access that tool and integrate other tools such as AI platforms into your case management system so that it can perform useful tasks like review documents, analyze contracts, that type of thing, look at time entries and those type of functionality. Those only become possible if you have an open API. If you don't, you're essentially running on a closed system. So you can't use AI to perform any interesting things with that data.
I can't imagine any modern law firm that doesn't have AI in its future plans. So much of what attorneys are called upon to do is to synthesize a great deal of facts from witness testimony, documents, and to research and find the law and to perform an analysis and then to use those things to advocate on behalf of your client. And it seems as if a lot of that can be performed rather effectively by AI. And it's not just the legal profession. There are some people who question whether attorneys might be largely replaced by AI. I would hope that's not the case, at least not during my career.
All of the research that I've conducted, it would lead me to believe that it will happen in waves, but you're already seeing the first wave, which is that attorneys are adopting AI and they're using it to augment their capabilities and to perform a higher quality of work in a shorter time period. There are various manifestations of how AI is being implemented in firms, specifically if you're talking from the perspective of whether the firm bills on the hourly, the classic hourly billing model, or if they have implemented either subscription fee models or flat fee models. Now, historically firms have used the Cravath model where, you have the partner at the top. They have, senior partners who they say, hey, they'll issue a legal question to. Senior partner then goes, they have associate attorneys who will then crank out the work and then deliver an answer. And he delivers it back up to the partner, right? And that's how the firm works, right? And this model is being threatened by AI because now maybe you're in a scenario where you don't need associates in order to perform the rote data analysis, right? Because if you can use a tool like a case text code counsel, or instead of using an associate, instead of analyzing 10,000 cases to figure out the 10 that are relevant to your matter, you simply enter the fact pattern. It understands the context of what you're looking for. And, it's able to deliver you the 20 most relevant cases instantly, right? Within, a minute and a half. So now that 4-hour task has just been reduced to a minute and a half. So then what does that do to the firm's billing model? Well, now they don't necessarily need the associates to be performing that work. So these associates can essentially be upskilled in order to perform more valuable tasks that require a more nuanced interaction rather than just performing simple, Boolean searches, right? And keyword searches within the case management system. And this is just one example of this. So it's interesting how this is all manifesting. Obviously, for plaintiffs' firms, they're loving this technology because they're already, either working on a contingency model or some flat fee. So they're incentivized to create as much efficiency as possible. Rather than, there's kind of two scenarios for the hourly firms. They can take advantage of it because instead of asking that first question about, what are the facts at play here and how are we going to craft our argument? And that's all the time you have. Well, now you can ask questions 2 and 3 and 4 and maybe question 20 with the additional time that you have. So these firms can still, they can still, it's not like they completely lose out on billing capacity. They're just able to have a more thoughtful argument put together that incorporates more facts, more data points, and is able to provide more competent counsel to their clients. Now, for the hourly firms, many of them are opting for the pure efficiency route. Let's get the answer as quickly as we can. And now this task that used to, my per unit cost was 4 hours to, produce a motion to compel. Now it's 10 minutes. So that's a direct profitability capture. So many of them are actually reducing their fees so that the client feels like they're getting a deal and the firm's profitability is still higher. So at the end of the day, this Jevons paradox here, the firm makes more money because they can take on a higher capacity of work.
Would you say it's an overstatement to say that the legal industry's adoption of AI poses an existential threat to the traditional Cravath model?
I couldn't say it any more directly. I mean, you're seeing it already where boutiques are popping up and they're realizing these efficiencies. They broke off, from a big law firm, and you get, 3 or 4 partners who now they found a boutique and they're crushing it because they're taking advantage of these efficiencies. The market always drives towards efficiency, at least in the capitalist market. So they're able to take that big law skill set and experience, and then they're able to discount the pricing so that normal people can afford their services, and they're just crushing it. They're able to take on more work. They have better quality of life since they're not just churning out hours day in, day out, hitting that 2,300 hour a year quota. They're able to have that work-life balance and output work that's better quality than what they were creating before, and do it at a price that makes sense for their end client.
Ultimately, I see AI inuring to the benefit of the clients, because as you said, they end up with a better quality work product delivered much more efficiently. And traditionally, law firms have kind of been rewarded by being inefficient. So I can see it really shaking up the core economics of the industry. But you mentioned something that caused me to think about a potential paradox where associate attorneys who usually learn how to practice law by being forced to do legal research and writing and a lot of the heavy lifting, but that's going to be replaced by AI. So the question is, how will they have a higher level skill set to do work that's incapable of being achieved through AI if they are not themselves the library rats of years past?
So I don't know that I have an answer for you, and I don't even know that I'm the person that's qualified to answer that. But what I do know is this. Like I mentioned to you, I'm a product of the 90s, right? And I remember originally when email was just introduced on the scene in like the early 2000s. I remember my father were at work, and he was transacting and working with in-house counsel and working with outside counsel. They were at the time, the attorneys were saying, hey, like you can't use email because there's a serious confidentiality risk. Someone could intercept that transmission. And then now you open up the client's data to the outside world. You can't use email. And then there was an opinion that came out several years later that said, hey, email is fine. And actually, if you don't use email, you're wasting your client's time by just sending money or by just sending mail, snail mail. Right, so you're wasting your client's money. And then it became, if you are using the internet in order to perform legal research, you can't use that. You got to go straight to the books. You got to go to the law library. And then an opinion came out. I think this is like in 2008, 2009. It's like, well, actually, you can use legal research, electronic legal research resources. And if you don't, you're actually wasting your client's money because it's more efficient that way. So I think we're going to see the same thing at some point. AI will be, an AI augmented workflow will be, and already is, the more efficient way to perform the legal work. It's just a matter of how long will it take for the judiciaries to catch up and say, hey, you've got to use AI because this is the more efficient way to perform things. It's coming. I don't know when. But as far as how the associates will be redeployed, I don't know what that answer is. I think firms will really need to be able to, they'll need to think about what is the core value that individual brings to the firm, and how do we best deploy their skill set to perform tasks that are meaningful for the firm, that give the clients a better output, and that
what sort of new technologies
value
on the horizon,
and revenue generation for the firm. So I think we'll see various manifestations of that. There's never one method and one task and one set way to go about this, but firms need to at least start thinking about how they would deploy these folks in order to best leverage their skill sets. Because for the base data collection and analysis, we definitely don't need humans to perform that. And I would argue humans don't usually want to perform those types of tasks anyway. Those are the tasks that they feel like work that's sort of beneath your law license or the level that you're able to practice at for any individual involved. So my thing is, like, people always talk about attorneys being supplanted, and not just attorneys. And I don't mean to get on a soapbox here, but across all professions, you hear people talking about how this technology may potentially create a situation where these individuals aren't needed anymore, or they'd be replaced. If there's a more efficient and productive way to perform any task that nets a better output for the client and all parties involved, we should always drive towards that. We should not halt progress just for the sake of protecting or preserving certain types of jobs or professions, right? Because with that mindset, you're not able to think about how you can best deploy your skills to provide even more value. You're just focused on preserving the old way of doing things. And if we had performed that, if we had followed this mindset, we'd still be all driving around horse-drawn carriages.
What technologies do you see on the horizon?
The technologies on the horizon most definitely are agentic AI. Are you familiar with sort of the difference between, I can explain to if that's necessary, the difference between agentic AI and traditional generative AI?
No, please do.
So the way traditional AI systems work, right? And primarily right now, the main generative AI systems we have are large language models. They are what ingest text and are able to provide an output that seems like it's reasoning, like the model is reasoning. So the way this works is you input your prompt. There's this latent data, this training data that's stored within the large language model. Like I said, this is trillions of documents in some cases for people like OpenAI. They actually just released GPT-5 and increased the size of that training data set. So this data is stored. When you input your prompt, it references against that data. It uses what's called vectors to assign probabilities and weights to various terms, phrases, and characters that you input. And it gives you an output that seems convincing enough that you would believe that the model was reasoning. And this is why you see folks sort of letting their guard down, especially in a legal context, submitting these fictitious cases, because the output is very convincing. And the AI presents this data in a very confident way. Sort of, it could lull the user into thinking that the information is always accurate when that's not necessarily the case. Right? So that's a traditional generative AI language model. Now, agentic AI, what it's able to do is it's able to actually understand a series of tasks that are required in order to complete a major objective. So, for example, you might say, here is this is an agreement. This is a merger agreement with the force majeure clause, right? And you might say, I need to generate one of these for my clients. And the client's name is XYZ, and the matter is matter 123. And you just say go. So this is very different from a regular generative AI model, because an agentic AI model is able to actually understand what sequence of steps needs to occur. And then it's able to schedule those prompts to be input into the system to then receive the results of that prompt and then have that inform the next steps of what it does next. So it's able to identify sequence and then perform those actions. And the benefit of using an agentic model is it has the additional ability to do what's called use tools. So these are things like Google search. These are things like to create calendar events or email reminders. It can directly interface with tools that you might use as a human user. So not only can it sequence these steps, but it can actually take action, so that you wind up with a document that is a synthesis of multiple steps and multiple documents that have all been brought together based on the sequence it decided it needed to take. And this is all based on your initial prompt. So that's where things are going now. You're already seeing Spellbook. They have a platform called Spellbook Associate. And that's one of the first agentic legal specific AI models. But there are many, and you're seeing the number increase day to day, and the capabilities are increasing. The thing that I was listening to an interview recently where attorney Damian Reel, and he's also a legal technologist who founded VLEX, which is an AI company, legal research tool. And Damian Reel, what he said is he was actually quoting someone else. I can't remember who he was quoting, but basically it says it's something like this: the future is here now. It's just not evenly distributed. So, when we're talking about these AI capabilities, there are some things that it does really well. There's some things it doesn't do well, right? And the technology is as bad as it will ever be today. And that's sort of what the mind-blowing thing about this is.
One of the things that strikes me about AI globally is, as I see it, it's a shift in the entire paradigm between how humans interact with the technology, because we're going from the graphic user interface to something that's really quite a bit different. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it causes you to rethink how you want to structure your legal services. It causes you to rethink, at least it should cause you to rethink what the value that you bring into the process is. Because if these tools are able to perform a lot of the analysis component, what is the value that you bring as an attorney? And it really is, truly, my belief is that you are able to provide counsel to your client. You're able to sort of talk them off the ledge. You're able to say, here are the data and the facts, and this is what it all means, and this is how it relates to your case. And hey, this settlement amount, it seems to be sufficient based on these facts and these evidence and this information that we've gathered and synthesized. This is a fair deal. Like, that's the component that the attorney is critical in the process of making sure that clients get the best output at the end of the day. So I think if you're not thinking about things that way, then you're at a major disadvantage, because the firms that think from their client's perspective are the ones who will succeed. Clients ultimately drive the market. They're the ones paying the bills. And right now I'm already seeing with many of my clients who are not using AI quite yet, clients are already starting to push back. They're asking for discounts and write-offs on bills because there was the last study I read on ChatGPT usage. It was around 63% of Americans have used ChatGPT, that's huge. So that means likely your consumer, your client, the consumer, they're using ChatGPT. They understand the efficiency gains there. So it really is like you're at the mercy of the client of what they'll put up with. And clients are putting up with increasingly less and less when it comes to activities that you'd like to bill them for. And if the client can see that AI could reasonably be expected to perform the output in a shorter time span, they'll say that. And they're already starting to say that to some of my clients. We see on the insurance defense side, it's sort of started there. The insurance carriers were putting downward pressure on the law firms because they were saying, hey, look, we've got data. We've got troves of data from firms all across the United States. Their time entries for X document production is, it's 10 hours and you're billing us 50. And we can see that it's able to be done in 10, likely using AI. So you can do it however you'd like, but you're only going to bill us for 10. We're paying 10 hours. So we saw it there first, and they've already largely adopted, and they've leveraged these efficiency gains because you have to in order to remain competitive in that market. These insurance carriers, they dictate the price, the hourly rates that you can bill. So it started there, but now you're seeing it across pretty much all areas of law.
I haven't read anything about this, but I would imagine that the advent of AI is very beneficial to pro se litigants, individuals who maybe can't otherwise afford legal counsel. And through the use of AI, they can really quite effectively represent themselves. And they don't necessarily need to have knowledge of a big body of law or procedure. Have you read or seen anything about that?
I have, as a matter of fact. So to be eligible for legal aid, I think you have to be under the standard poverty limit, which I think is around $16,000 in annual income. So there are platforms out there where you can, as a pro se litigant, you can input the facts of your case and make better arguments. And this is a net win for all parties involved, because now these pro se litigants are able to accurately represent themselves in a way that gives them access to information that's ultimately going to help them to get a better outcome for their case. So I think it's just a net benefit for all parties involved. It's less the burden on our system, and it gets better outputs for the individuals involved. I can't see a reality where anyone would think that's a negative.
I believe that, just the concept of, freedom and liberty and justice embodies within it the concept that it should be available to all and that the ability to pay shouldn't be an impediment or have a preclusive effect on someone having effective representation of counsel. So I think in a societal and philosophical way, I see AI fulfilling some of the core values of what our country was founded on. And I don't mean that to sound corny. I think it's a very empowering technology. And to me, that's actually very exciting. I don't see that as being a threat to my livelihood, but I see it as a way of promoting justice in our society. So it's going to be very interesting to see how societally that all unfolds.
Now, I'm curious, Steve, did you think that AI would evolve so rapidly to the stage that it's in now? And if not, what was your initial take on, let's go back to 2022 when these large language models just started becoming popular? As a matter of fact, I mentioned Spellbook earlier. I mentioned Spellbook's associate, but, Spellbook Classic, if you will, which is the contract drafting and review platform. Most people don't know that Spellbook actually preceded ChatGPT's the public announcement. So ChatGPT was in beta for a very long time in a closed private beta, but Spellbook was out before ChatGPT. So it's sort of interesting how the legal profession has been really fertile ground for these AI tools to take off because of the fact that AI large language models are really good at analyzing and producing text output. And that's the entire output of the legal profession is based on text documents, dealing with text documents. So I'm curious what your perspective on all of these AI tools were initially, and if that's changed over time.
Well, to me, it just seemed to come out of nowhere. It seemed almost like a novelty. But then all of a sudden it became a really hard reality. And it was permeating not just the legal industry, but a lot of industries. At some point, it just really caught my attention. And what's been amazing to me is, well, two things. One, it seems to have been evolving just exponentially from week to week. It's incredible. And part of that, I believe, is a function of the self-learning capabilities of AI. But then the other thing is the willingness of people to embrace it in what they do. And I think currently people are just scratching the surface in terms of the capabilities of what AI can do. So to answer your question, I would say in the last 4 or 5 months, it's been very, very eye-opening. And it seems like on a weekly basis, there's some revelation about AI and its capabilities. And it's really exciting. If you are a historian, you'd go back and you'd look at the development of technology in the United States and in the world. And a lot of that emanated from the United States space program. And then ultimately that filtered down to the consumer level. But it took a long time. You were talking about dial-up internet connection and that strange noise it used to make. But it wasn't long after that other forms of broadband became available. And then first thing you know, everybody had internet on their desk at work, and people started using email, not fax anymore. People rarely send letters, but if you think of how many years it took through that progression and you compare that to how quickly things are evolving now, it's really mind-blowing. It's been fun and it's exciting. Part of it is a little scary. I mean, the whole concept of the singularity. Can you explain that to our listeners?
Yeah, and before I do that, I wanted to bring up another point, which is that, you talk about the rapid advancement of AI. And a lot of this is due to the fact that AI can, exponentially learn based on its previous teachings. So it's able to take that previous context and use that to enhance its learning ability in the future. But also, let's not forget that a major component that drives this AI arms race, which it really is the fact that if your AI is better than mine, you have an unfair advantage over me, right? So then things like, cyber warfare or cyber crimes, you're able to effectively destabilize me and my economy, right? Or, you have a platform like OpenAI who they will decide that a particular feature or function is too dangerous for public use and they'll hold it back. But the funny part about it is that, well, now if you have a company like a competitor like a Claude who develops a similar technology, they will release it because they want to be the leader in the marketplace. So then what happens is now OpenAI, they're going to release theirs. And this has happened several times. I'll link to an article I just recently read, where there's several inflection points where this has happened, where the large language model has held back functionality that they deem too dangerous for public use. And then they release it weeks or months later, once one of their competitors do. So this arms race is sort of fueling this advancement of AI, and it's not going to slow down. AI has grown leaps and bounds, and it's only happening at an accelerating pace.
You attribute that to just sheer market forces.
Market forces, enterprise expansion, and and I think consumers are craving more of this technology as more people integrate AI into their day-to-day. My wife uses ChatGPT every single week when she creates our grocery list, because she will actually use it to come up with recipes. She'll say, I want to make some unique foods that we don't typically have this week. Give me 7 dinner recipes and then tell me what the ingredient list should be so I can shop for those and organize it by the order that the aisles are arranged. She'll do that every single week. More people use AI to create bedtime stories for their kids, and they incorporate family members and their favorite colors. Like, there's so many use cases for it. So as people find these use cases, a feature that really went under the radar, and I'm not sure why, because it's phenomenal. I've been really training my clients to spot areas that they can use this technology more often, is image recognition and camera use. ChatGPT, back in December, they had their 12 days of OpenAI event. And in this event, every single day, they released a new groundbreaking feature. One of those days, they released advanced voice mode. And along with advanced voice mode, they released camera use. So you're able to actually, in a ChatGPT interface, have ChatGPT access your camera and describe what it sees around it in the surroundings. It can do various things. Like, you can have it solve math problems that are written on equations, linear equations. You can have it solve that. You can have it, one of the examples I use for my clients, the personal injury firm, let's say your client draws a sketch of the accident that they were involved in. You can have ChatGPT look at that sketch and then draft your initial brief, right? Like, this is not something you need to submit to the court, but it at least gives you a starting point based on a drawing from a camera image. So, this is, there's so many use cases for this stuff. And as people find more use cases, the developers are simply just creating what's possible. But the end users are actually who are fueling the innovation by using these platforms in ways that they were not originally intended. And then these uses become sort of the core functionality. So, because I'm just remembering back to your original point. So, when does the singularity happen? It may have already happened, is my thought. And for the people who don't know the concepts of singularity, essentially this is the point in time where AI intelligence surpasses human intelligence. If you look at ChatGPT 4, well, let's start back with 3.5. With ChatGPT 3.5, which was about a year ago, this model was released. You can see we're already on 5. There's been like seven models in between. That shows you how quickly this evolves. But anyway, ChatGPT 3.5, they had it take the bar exam, and it beat 30% of human participants. ChatGPT 4, which came out 4 or 5 months later, they had it take the bar exam. It was beating 90% of human respondents. I haven't seen an updated report on, because now we have ChatGPT o1 that was released, which is their deep reasoning model. Then they have o3, which is currently sort of in beta, o3 mini, but o3 is supposed to be released within the next month or so. And these represent major leaps forward in the model. And then GPT-5 is actually right around the corner as well, where GPT-5 is more so of that. It's a model made for narrative writing, not necessarily deep reasoning. So I would imagine that o3 would be more suitable for something like the bar exam. But, it's already, like I mentioned, that ChatGPT 4 is already operating at a PhD level. So I would argue that most consumers are not operating at a PhD level. So we may have already reached that singularity and we don't realize it.
So we've reached that point in our program where I'm going to ask you the capstone question. Granted, you're not an attorney and you have not conducted a cross-examination unless you've represented yourself in court, but have you ever asked that one question too many?
Absolutely. I've asked that one question too many with my wife. When we were first dating, I remember that we were sort of in the getting to know you phase, right? And we had known each other several months. And interesting thing for us is that we actually didn't physically go on our first date until about 6 months in, knowing each other. We were learning a lot about each other. We were getting closer. We were talking. We were video chatting every day. And I asked that one question. I asked her to go on a date. She agreed. Then I started over-explaining what I wanted to do, where we wanted to go. We were supposed to originally just go to dinner. And I asked her, hey, instead of going to dinner, just dinner, let's go to bowling and the movies. And she didn't actually have enough time for that. And then the whole thing sort of unraveled. And that was like in month 3. So it took until like 6 months for us to actually meet. So I would say that would definitely classify as that one question too many.
Threw your timeline off by 6 months.
It did. But we're still in the game, Steve. We've been happily married now for a year and a half.
Good for you. Congratulations.
Thanks.
So we've been speaking with Jay McAllister, the CEO of Paragon Tech, a technology consultant to law firms. Jay, can you tell our listeners how to get a hold of you?
Absolutely. You can always find me on LinkedIn, just first name, last name. And I'm always posting content. It's sort of a stream of consciousness there. So if you like that sort of stuff, as I find and learn new things about legal technology, that's where I sort of put everything on that central hub, as well as you can catch me on YouTube. Look up Paragon Tech on YouTube. We have full-length tutorials on things like using AI, creating custom GPTs, how do you adjust your billing model to accommodate for AI use. And we've got like 30-minute, in some cases, like hour-long tutorials that are very in-depth on various legal topics. And we try to keep things fun and energetic. So those are the places where I typically hang out.
What is your URL?
For what's that, YouTube or LinkedIn?
I assume that Paragon Tech has a website.
ParagonTechIT.com. Funny enough, this is sort of an interesting intersection. We've just launched a brand new website today. So for any of your curious viewers who want to see, what we've come up with, then that's there for you.
Thanks for being on our show. I really enjoyed it, Jay.
It's a blast, Steve. Thanks.
Tune in for our next episode, where our guest will be attorney and author Aubrey Ralph, the founder of Scrappy Girl Project in New York, which provides training on leadership growth, development, and strategies for healthful and sustainable leadership careers. If you liked today's episode, please subscribe to our podcast.